World building. Some people love it, some people hate it. Comes naturally to a lot of folks. However, it can be a hurdle. Been DMing for several many years, been playing D&D and as a player for even longer, and sort of been creating worlds as long as I've had imagination at my access. It's certainly a monumental task to create and inspire and make a living, breathing world. One of the biggest stressors I've always had is make a complete world. When you're in charge and behind that DM screen, it's worth note that honestly you are the one with all the answers. It's okay to say, I don't know, can I get back to you? Or, I haven't really fleshed that out, let me work on it. But sometimes you want to be prepped on the front end. I don't think there's any shame in helping use the countless resources available to everyone in order to properly set yourself up for success. There's a few that I've been fond of, and one that I plan on bringing to life in this video. So, I was watching a Monarch's Factory video a little while back, and she brought up the M.A.G.P.I.E.S method, much more collectively named as we go through each letter, a lot more memorable. So it breaks down into military. So who's around? Who's the guard? Is it just a town guard? Is it just a local hunter? Is it the guard captain? Is there a standing army? This all depends on scaling, and scaling is one of the biggest things you have to think of. Okay, is it a village I'm making? Is it a town I'm making? Is it a kingdom I'm making? Is it a country I'm making? Is it a world I'm making? Because a lot of these things can be trickled down or sized up. After military, it comes to economics. So, what's the system of currency? Is it favors? Is it gold? Any number of things in any location can work fine. Sometimes you have a smaller scale city and they're more interested in a little bit of labor and work than they have any business to care about platinum. But obviously, the more civilization and inner workings that you have the ability to delve further into what what determines what something's worth. And then for R, we got religious. It's certainly worth noting that theology in the grand sense of world building is a trial unto itself. There's plenty of excellent videos out there about what it takes to make a god, or what it takes to make a pantheon, or how to better flesh out this, flesh out that. And maybe one day I'll even give my 2 cents as to what it helps me when designing a pantheon. However, beneath all of that, you have to have the believers, the systems that facilitate religion. So, in this village, city, kingdom, what do you think their religion is? Is it some of the big gods and they're pretty straightforward, worshipping the Olympians? Do they worship a lone god? What's the end all be all here? You don't have to really identify it as right or wrong, but we have to be able to identify who the town healer is, who the doctor is. Do they have magical access? Are they high enough level to be able to perform miracles? All these are things you kind of want to consider. Next for P is political. Pretty straightforward, but try and think of it just as who's your leadership. King, Baron, Duchess, Mayor. Again, you got to talk on scale, but on top of that, where are your connections? Who's in charge? Who's most powerful? Lastly is social. The biggest thing with this one, I think it's a twofold process. When you're looking at this as an ability for you to flesh out an area, social, you want to look at it as places for your party to go and talk, or individuals for your party to get kicked off in whatever the plot of the area is. However, in this instance, I would also look at where do NPCs get information? Is there a spy network? Is there a tavern that everyone meets and talks at? Where do people break down communication? So that's the good old M.A.G.P.I.E.S method. Couldn't think of another name for it. Couldn't rearrange these letters in any other meaningful way to make it family friendly. But that was what I was inspired by in making this video from Monarch's Factory. And I did some searching because I've sort of just always done world building on my own, kind of just winged it. I've scribbled stuff down in notebooks, I've typed up Google Docs, I've typed up Excel sheets, I've hoarded reference images from every corner. I've done it all. So I'm trying to get better about taking in structure and helping myself orient and organize. Another method I came across when I was doing some research was the Persian method. We start with political, which breaks down the same, even the next couple of economics, religious, and social. Now, the last three are a bit different, and I think are worth noting. So I is for intelligence. Now, this is kind of what I lumped social into in the previous example. You know, where does information, not just social information and clout, but frankly also, is there a library? Are there scholars? Are there researchers? Is there your local town inventor? Where does information live in this area? The next up is arts. So humans create, we create what we love, and we create from what we love. And from that, obviously, comes art. There's any number of artistic endeavors and creations that can happen. Something that's worth noting is the people behind the art. And what does the art mean? Is it meaningful in the sense of, is it a contentious play? Is it a scandalous painting? Is it an expose? Are they the Reynolds papers? You know, is there story, is there weight behind it? The local artisan's painting is actually a secret pathway for the Underdark to be able to walk straight into this unsuspecting city. And the artist is possessed into making this arcane pathway for it. And if the party doesn't notice that from day to day that individuals in the painting are moving or missing, then they may not foresee the oncoming attack. Lastly, for N is near, and in parentheses, whenever I've initially seen this, it refers to geography. What's around? And I think that's actually one of the things I certainly lack ability to speak on a lot of times. I think the geography of the area, to me, almost always just, if it's not a defining feature, it tends to fall to the wayside. So, if I have, a magical river running through a village it never freezes, even in the coldest winters, I don't think too much on it, because that becomes such a defining trait that I don't have to worry about forgetting it. However, if I just have a kingdom that's so caught up in more political or religious or occult or whatever, then in the back of my mind it's becoming a flat, grassy plains. And it's certainly something I need to work on. Of all of these, I think that is probably where I think my greatest weakness is personally. I've found that if I can't create an interesting NPC or link a player character to something, then I struggle to really bring out the inner motivation to really build and delve into. Thus, obviously, the land and the shape of the land and the geography and all that kind of good stuff is something that does tend to fall to the wayside. But with all of this, I'd like to introduce you to what I've come together with, the M.A.G.P.I.E.S method. A little on brand. I was quite proud whenever I plugged all my letters into a word generator, and I came through with this. So, we're going to go through it. Some it's going to seem familiar, but I'll talk through it, and then we're going to talk through building a small to mid-size kingdom or city. So, M is for military. So, the leader of whatever guard or army, whatever faction. Obviously, think to scale when you're doing this. I would say think to scale when you're doing any of these. With military, your scale ranges from, I've had small villages to where it's a volunteer guard of just the young and healthy, and maybe your guard captain is just the local hunter who just has the most experience behind a crossbow. But this can also go up to the High Kingdoms. You have the captain of the King's Guard, and the King's War Advisor, and the King's War Council. So you really have the opportunity here to scale it in whichever threshold you need. Up next, A is for arts. I think there's a lot of narrative weight and experience in the arts. Obviously, art in its very nature speaks to some feeling, emotion, experience. And I think there's a lot of story impact. Obviously, military comes to the pillar of combat, and that just naturally has a lot of weight in the world. But art speaks to humanity, so expression, vulnerability, all of these things can be conveyed. So think of the different types of arts. Obviously, writing, painting, drawing, dancing, acting. The sky's the limit. You could have a haunted theater house. You could have, again, that portal to the Underdark. You could have controversial encoded writing of a political advisor trying to leak secrets of the government out to the public. And artists can be wild and weird characters. You can go from a prodigy who draws beautiful drawings and has never left the village, all the way to quite literal celebrity actors who are so famous for their portrayal of characters and their enrapturing performance. Up next, G is for geography. Obviously, as I've spoken on, this is certainly my weakest point of consistency. However, what I want to bring attention with it is, why does it matter? And I think in a lot of ways it's self-explanatory. It matters because what we're around impacts every day. The weather determines, when you're getting out of bed and getting ready for work, how you need to dress. Do you need to go warm up your car? Are you going to be blasting the AC? If you got a lot of winding back roads because of hills, do you need to drive a little slower? If you have dense fog because of the humidity and the elevation and temperature changes, is there other things you need to do? And that's just in a very literal, modern sense. That's a very present, just human sense for us. Now, in a fantasy world where we have to look at it for the confines of D&D, do you have the ability to travel easily when going from kingdom to kingdom? Can you make your way safely? Are there roads? Are there easily identifiable pathways? Are there mountains? Are there hazards? Maybe if it snows a lot and you have sheet ice and all that kind of stuff, maybe your player characters have to break through thick layers of ice. Maybe they accidentally stumble upon a frozen lake. Any number of things. All of these things can matter. What's around? Is it a forest? Is it a mountain range? Hills? Plains? Swamp? Desert? Arctic? Any of it's okay. And the biggest thing I want to stress here is decide the world you want to build. I have played with a DM who does exceptional because he wants it to be realistic, be believable, have cycles and weather and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, that's not me. So you may have a whole desert kingdom in the middle of the continent, and you may have an ice kingdom to the north and a forested kingdom to the east, futuristic technomancy kingdom to the west, and the dragons are at the south. You don't have to break up and determine, how does global warming impact my kingdom? Decide what general setting you want. Water, coastal, grasslands, forest, all the kind of things that have just been listing and listing and listing. Decide what is around, and then decide how does it impact. Are there not many travelers? Is everyone a little suspicious of the party because they have just recently stumbled into town, and because of that they're wanting to question and they're cutting their eyes, and no one really wants to do business with these newcomers because no one should be able to make it through that swamp? What's wrong with them? Do they have ulterior motives? Just all those kinds of things. Do they have natural defenses? That's another important thing, especially if you're playing into, any type of campaign that may have warfare elements, may have sieges, may have, mass combat. What advantages and disadvantages? If they're at the bottom of a valley and have combat rain down upon them, then obviously that's going to destroy them. However, if they're on top of a hill or against a mountain and they have this bulwark of a front wall, then perhaps they'll be able to be the line in the sand against that overwhelming enemy faction. Up next, P is for politics. Obviously, as I've said before, it's who's in charge. Not just who's in charge, but who possesses influence. It's come up in medieval history classes, who's the most powerful man in the kingdom? The king or the man who controls the army. Now, obviously, that alludes back to military. Politics includes your army. It includes your economics. It includes your religion. Everything swells and interacts with and blends together when you're looking at politics. You want to look at connections and where things, where's their tension, where's their drama, where's their story, where's their need for something, where is their desperation, where is their complacency. You want to think of all of these things whenever you're filling out the whole, and I'll want to urge you guys to stick around, because once I go through the M.A.G.P.I.E.S kingdom building method with you guys, there's a little bit of an understanding that I want to go through, because I've also just recently had a breakthrough with how I build leadership and how I build essentially the politics and the leadership in a kingdom or given area. And if you guys hold on past the M.A.G.P.I.E.S world building method, and we're just a little past halfway, we'll talk through that together with our example. So, the next letter, I, is for intelligence. As previously mentioned, this is where information gathers, and think of it as a twofold process. Where is information stored? Public records, libraries, scholars, schools, all of it's fair game. And the next portion is, where is information exchanged? Social information, jobs, all that kind of stuff. This is where, for the most part, honestly, you'll just be dealing with taverns. I know the "so you met in a tavern" is an age-old, tried-and-true way of starting a campaign, but that's there for a reason. These are just hubs of gossip and quest initiatives and all that kind of stuff. You can always have a town drunk, you can always have a dramatic scene, a bar fight, world-weary and wise barkeep. You can also have, depending on your setting, spy networks. You can have your Thieves Guild, all those kinds of things might be where valuable information is exchanged. An underappreciated thing that I personally feel like could be taken more advantage is give your players valuable information. Not just gold, or not just, a magical item or whatever, but give them something that has power behind it. Next up, economics. This is one that I think in a lot of ways can be unfortunately boring. Obviously, a lot of people just, and I do as well, a lot of people just think of, platinum, gold, silver, copper. And they just use the 1 for 10, 1 for 10, 1 for 10 exchange rate. Even if you were to use whatever currency you have in the real world and just adapt and translate that, that's fine. Just have an understanding of it. If places are different from where you travel, if your elves do different than your dwarves, if your humans in the north do it different than your gnomes in the south, any of those kinds of things, just try and be mindful of them. Keep track of them. Maybe making a cheat sheet for yourself. But past just the physical money element of it. The other end of it is, relevant businesses. So your skilled traders, your shopkeeps, anyone who sells anything, anyone who participates in the economy itself. Past this, there's a few things in economics that I think are greatly important for you, just as a dungeon master, to think of. Whenever your party's adventuring, you are more than likely going to have individuals who are interested in weapons. So having access to stock standard tried and true weapons is obviously something to be mindful of. But on top of that, they're probably going to want interesting weapons. And what comes with interesting more often than not is magic. So is it a magic-rich world? Does magic, are magical items looted around the world in chests and bandit alcoves and ruins and graveyards, and you collect, you sell, you trade, and everyone's got a couple of magical oddities and trinkets laying around? These are things you should decide on, because every player's going to want more magical items, so figuring out where you want to give them, where you want to have them available, that puts a lot of onus on you as the dungeon master to determine what's needed and where. Last key point of economics that I want to touch on is a fun one, and one that I recently really had the gas turned up on me wanting to implement better. I know I've previously mentioned with our tried and true M.A.G.P.I.E.S method, Monarch's Factory, However, she also has an exceptional video on implementing a black market. I won't go into too much detail about everything she advises and recommends and all that kind of good stuff. I encourage you guys to go and watch it. Very insightful, very informative. But one thing that I saw that she recommended is our ugly duckling of currency, the Electrum. There are two places it's used, in magic stores and in the black market. And I think that tells a very interesting story, and I think just adds a natural importance to this extra coin. No one ever used it before, no one ever collected it before, but making it available to your players to where you can interact with, you can find that little extra, you can experiment with and test. Last is S, and S is for spiritual. It's mostly because my other identifying letters of R for religious and F for faith didn't help spell out anything particularly catchy, but S for spiritual. This comes down to, again, your local church. Is it a church to a specific god? Is it a church to a specific pantheon? Is there no church and the whole place is ran by a cult? All of these things obviously play a role. But once you identify as a whole your military lead, your arts, your geography, your politics, your intelligence, your economics, and your spiritual, you'll have a better understanding of the kingdom. You can start filling in the gaps. Your NPCs, what they want, what they need, the condition of everything. And with each time you indulge in either the M.A.G.P.I.E.S method, the Persian method, or the M.A.G.P.I.E.S method, whichever one seems to fit you best, with each time you'll further and further understand how to fall into the habit and be able to pump out and build more, enjoy more, spend less time worrying about, oh, what did I forget, what did I need, spend more time doing what's fun to you. And maybe a super in-depth political schemes, drama, and all that kind of stuff's where you find your fun. Maybe you love rival factions caught up in illicit dealings and drama and adult relationships with one another and the romance and all that kind of stuff. And whatever's good to you is good. Ain't gonna hurt me, ain't gonna impact. With that, I wanted to take you guys through and go through the M.A.G.P.I.E.S method with you guys. So I'll use a setting that I didn't ever get to fully flesh out because the campaign made, I think, about 2 sessions in before I was told that one of the players just didn't actually want to play, and that's why she was never scheduling. We'll start with the military. So I guess I'll kind of just address that this kingdom is named Grindilo. That's just the name that I settled on. In Grindilo, it is a sizable seaport territory that has recently come across a great finding. A large, dead, mauled sea creature had been pulled in by some of the ships, so obviously we're dealing with a port city of sorts, but this titan-like sea creature has been raised up at the center of the port by cranes and pulleys and all that kind of stuff, and is being started to be harvested and studied to try and figure out what is it and what happened to it. That being a large catalyst of what I wanted the campaign to go to. But let's look at the actual setting. So for the military, I remember back when I was designing them, I really wanted it to sit in and feel kind of, that coastal, that ocean-like kind of inspiration. So my city guard broke down in the captain, was known as the Megalodon, the second lieutenant, the Great White, the guard barracks were known as the Reef, and then for the ranks of guards it went Barracuda, which was equivalent to a private or private first class, a hammer, who was a corporal or sergeant, and a tiger, who was a first lieutenant or investigator. So I did use a very just stock standard American military as far as my exposure goes, breakdown to structure what I wanted the guard to look like, because I wanted to take that shark inspiration. And the captain of Grindilo was a Yuan-Ti pureblood known as Helsa. He was stoic, serious, and wore, actually pretty much you could identify the guards by the collaring around their chest piece and around their back, identified the various size of teeth and rows of teeth that you would use to kind of attribute to. Now obviously Megalodon are in their own right massive, so he wasn't walking around with the jaw of a Megalodon around his shoulders, but anyone in the city would be able to identify hey, this means that. So that takes care of my military. So Helsa was able to be a stoic, reserved, tight captain of his ship in how he handled everything. So up next is arts. Now, looking at the setting dot, I don't know if I had anything that jumped out as just a direct artistry. I guess in turn, something you could look at is I had 3 rival blacksmiths, and obviously while you'd look at blacksmithing, you know, as a very just technical trade, obviously armor and weapons in their own right are definitely still art. It's still a craft. It's still an invention of expression. So I had 3 rival blacksmiths, Molotov, who ran a store by Hammer and Tongs, Sothar, who ran Pound World, and Cool, who ran Or Restore. So you have these 3 individuals who may have pre-existing relationships. Maybe 2 of them are former business partners. You have this tension and possible interactions that can happen, and then you gotta ask yourself, okay, why are there 3? Obviously, you know, Grindylow, the intent behind it is it's a port city, so you're able to make and sell and send out and have return. So there is probably a good bit of commerce here. It's not just a empty backwoods village in the middle of nowhere. So there being a few options for blacksmithing isn't a huge, you know, oversight. You'll probably not have anyone question it, but you want to ask yourself, okay, if who's the best? Who's the worst? Who's struggling? Who made the deal with the devil to be able to survive? Any of these kinds of things could be important. So, next up is G is for geography. As I mentioned, Grindylow is near a sea, so that puts it on a coast. I didn't think much of what Grindylow inland would be. Like if you were to try and land travel away from Grindylow. I know there were world maps around. I had a whole bunch of this particular age of my world had various factions that had control of mass territories. The focus of Grindylow in its entirety was pretty tied up to the sea. A lot of the exposure would be with the drama that comes in from the sea, the possibility of traveling out, the interaction of what happens on the coast, the mystery of this great monster. So I would fixate more on what the sea means, what does the the port represent for the story and the identity of that being, you know, a port. Oftentimes you got many different walks of life. You got plenty of people coming in. Are there people coming in trying to escape something? Or there, you know, is there contraband being brought in and someone's trying to sneak stuff in, and in turn you introduce that black market that I spoke of with economics. All of these things are things to think about. With any and all of these, I heavily encourage you to think of inspiration. What's another port city you like? What's another desert kingdom you like? Is there a book that really you just love the words used to describe? Is there a show that's just your instant visual, like, yep, I think this place should look like Solitude. I think this place should look like Endor. Just whatever you want. Next up will be P for politics. So this is where politics as leadership is pretty direct. So obviously any mayor, baron, duchess, king, queen, emperor, all those kinds of things can be important to flesh out if you're looking at the big picture. For little old Grindylow, it is led by Mayor Knight. Interesting thing about Mayor Knight, because, you know, in whatever world, you can play fast and loose with whatever you want. She is a Night Walker that is disguised down into the form of a drow female. She is married to a warforged noble who used to be an adventurer, but after a defining battle with a Night Walker that showed that his party didn't view him as an equal or a living being after being dealt a crippling wound, he decided to retire to Grindylow and support the next generation of adventurers. So that's your leadership. Now, one might have to ask, what does Mayor Knight want? What does this undead, ghostly creature of terrible power, what does it want here? Why is it disguising itself? Is it running from something? Is it scheming something? All things you can really dig down into and try and figure out. And then you have the opportunity with Damon Felbrand. He's a former adventurer. You can use that as a catalyst for connecting with your party. You can use that as a catalyst of maybe he refers you to someone. Maybe he understands something better. Any and all of it's perfectly acceptable. But past that, obviously, you would also have to look and understand that Helsa, the Megalodon, plays an important role in politics. Remember that adage that I said earlier, who's the most powerful person in the kingdom, the king or the individual who leads the army? Is the Megalodon the most influential role? Do people fear him more than they fear her, even if they may not understand what Mayor Knight is, truly? All things to just keep in mind. Now, there are plenty of other elements in the structure of leadership and connection, like maybe there's guilds or representatives of those guilds that would play a role in politics, but I won't go too much into that detail. So, intelligence. This comes down to where do people get their information, and on top of that, where does information get shared? I will say the docks obviously are going to be a hot place of conversation and travel. People sharing stories as they come and go. That's obviously going to be a big deal. There is a criminal guild, so alluding back to that black market that I keep talking about. In Grindy Low, the Green Hooks. I imagine them sort of as a little better off than Skyrim's Thieves Guild, but by me being able to compare them to Skyrim's Thieves Guild, it certainly shows that you aren't in a winning position. They're surviving, but they're not necessarily thriving. With this, you have dealings with illicit information, you have dealings with contraband, you have dealings with maybe sting operations if you end up befriending the Megalodon or anyone in the Guard. There would definitely be taverns and all that kind of stuff in Grindy Low, in which there would be taverns in which you'd be able to gather information and resources. I can't say if I ever made one for Grindy Low, but there'd also be record keeping facilities. There would be places where ledgers and information is stored, where laws are stored, all that kind of stuff, because it's a busy enough and wealthy enough area to where there has to be record. Up next is economics. Again, I've stated numerous times at this point that you have to determine what runs a city, what drives a city, and obviously with Grindy Low being a port city, commerce is essential. I have never really explored on my end of the DM screen, having Elvish coins versus Dwarvish coins, and what is one worth the other? Does a certain mint, does it have a certain leader on it, and that makes it worth more? Bars versus coins, and weight, and all that kind of stuff. All of the minutia of that has never really been what I've fixated on. I have always kind of thought back to the expression of if you put interesting characters in difficult situations, that's what brings the narrative forward. That's what drives an interesting and dynamic session. So to me, fixating on different gold amounts and this and that, it's always been a very hand-wavy element of world building to me. However, having that understanding of, Grindy Low is a place with a lot of imports and exports, so would they be able to find what they want? Would they be able to truly identify? Would it get lost? Would they have to put in work? Perhaps people want favors, because again, the Green Hooks are around the bend, and there's a lot of people who are in and out, so maybe they've already gotten their paycheck, but they want something more. And because of that, they're willing to wheel and deal, because maybe they'll never come back to Grindy Low, so they don't have to face the repercussions of it. After economics is spiritual. So I'll talk on some gods that don't mean a whole lot to really any of you. But in my world, this would have been in Asius, who I'm sure as I talk and go on further diatribes, you'll have an understanding more and more of this world. I did use a version of the Red Knight. There's several of the just traditional D&D gods who I kind of ripped, ground down to their pure essence, or sometimes just literal name and general appearance, and then I kind of turned into my own thing once I evolved and decided what I wanted them to mean in my world. One of them being the Red Knight, because a common thing with the upper pantheon in my world is various gods took on multiple forms, because different cultures identified them and needed different things from them. So the Red Knight had the warrior, the strategist, and the tempest. And in Grindy Low, it was the last one, the Tempest, that was most important. Tempest really represents that raw, just passion and willing to fight for and survive. So the uninsurmountable ocean, obviously that very just kind of Viking strength to charge the seas and endure whatever hardship, was a symbol of strength. and, courage and fearlessness that you would pray to and for. Next god that was fairly prominent would be T'Amrek-Mer. This is a storytelling god in Asius. A little homage that I made just due to my own appreciation, but a wandering god who shares stories and probably plays a more involved role with up-and-coming adventurers than most gods will. You may never know you'll talk to this individual, as they will likely be in disguise, but they're always wanting to be involved in the story, always wanting to be there for some present growth. And last up was M.A.G.P.I.E, who is in a lot of ways a god of travel and a god of adventure, but because of those things, a lot of it becomes that safe travel, that safe journey, the end result being that arrival at that destination. Now, the mythology that I built around M.A.G.P.I.E doesn't always mean you really want to be emulating him, but part of it is praying to him so he gets to you on time. So those are the predominant gods. Now, that being said, Grindylow is obviously a center of a lot of conversation, port city, in and out, everyone of every different walk of life, every different kind of situation is present, and something you have to consider is there may be churches, but there's probably going to be much smaller just statues at the port in which someone can walk up to and say a quick prayer, or give tithing to, or priests who are out and about at the ports praying to vessels for safe travels and easy rides and all that kind of stuff. But with that, I believe that covers the M.A.G.P.I.E.S method. But at the end of it, I want to go a bit more into detail with talking about the political structure. So it is something I struggled with a lot in world building for years and years and years and years, until I really thought about it. What runs a kingdom? How do I be sure I know who builds my bridges versus who enforces the law versus who runs the army and who deals with the people problems, agriculture, all those different things? How do I be sure I kind of encapsulate everything? And then I kind of took a step back and looked at my position in corporate America and thought, hey, I work for a moderately sized company. What does their leadership say is needed to run all of these things? Because I didn't want to just look up, hey, medieval counselors or advisors, what does each role fit? Because that doesn't, I feel like, always translate to modern audiences as to where we think we may need to go. On top of that, I also wanted to account for the fact that, for some DMs, you really try and run your world in that medieval Europe, that very just baseline low magic fantasy setting. All well and good. I encourage you to seek out those historical references for accuracy. However, for me personally, I've always found that while a lot of fantasy is grounded back in that older technology, you also have to account for some translation in magical advancements and the arcane. How does that shape and translate into political structure, advancement, continuous improvement, all of those kinds of elements? And with that, I came up with something that's, the working term is the Masters of Leadership. So the way it breaks down is you have your Master of the Kingdom. So this is your king. This is the figurehead. This is the spokesperson. This is the person when you're asked who's in charge around here, you say that name. They're the rightful ruler by whatever means. They're the one who's quote-unquote in charge at the end of the day. So up next is the Master of Mara. To me, this was built in the concept of the next in line. So for a king, it may be their queen, it may be their eldest son, it may be their daughter, it may be their brother, it could be any number of person or persons identified by whatever cultural establishments you have. But it's the next identified person to be Master of the Kingdom. So up next is Master of War. So again, it goes back to that military leader. Who is the one who organizes in the event of military action? Pretty straightforward, but it could be a guard captain, military generals, former adventuring party if you want to go into that, kind of where your political kingdom gets shaped by the actions of a higher level party of the past who have now ingrained themselves in the government. Master of People. deals with a lot of civil issues, probably has a large sweeping net of people underneath them. I imagine deals with a lot of just civil complaints and civil needs, your county clerk kind of people, but also I think would be the person who, in my eyes, is over a lot of legal concerns. So the court system, in a lot of ways, would fall under that. Judges, all that kind of stuff, but they would answer to the Master of People. Probably in some ways being linked also with the Master of Faith, who is the religious figurehead. So a lot of people, law and religion kind of go hand in hand to arbitrate commonalities in society. And Master of Faith is one similar to the Master of Military or Master of War that I won't beat the horse too much on because we've already talked in great length about those. But next up would be Master of Magic. So an Archmage, a court wizard, the most powerful magic individual, could easily be a druid, could easily be a traveling warlock who has residence here, but everyone identifies as, you know, the person, the expert, can be affiliated directly with the government if you so choose, could answer to the Master of Kingdom, or they could quite literally just be your wanderer expert in a lot of ways, you know, your Dr. Fate or your Dr. Strange, who may not hold an official role or a seat at the table, but when magic stuff's starting to happen, you go and ask them their opinion. Next is Master of Coin. So internal commerce and business licenses and all that kind of stuff. So in a lot of ways, similar to the Master of Peoples, where they'd be dealing with a lot of the civil and legal concerns, this deals with the banks, businesses, everyone's fun in doing fantasy taxes, all that kind of stuff. This would be that individual. Up next is Master of the Feast. So this is your agricultural lead. So whoever is in charge of helping maintain crops, farming, aid to those, advancements in technologies and resources with those, and really that just whole umbrella. After the Master of Feast comes the Master of Structure, so think of this as your architecture and kingdom maintenance. So obviously everyone's going to continually improve, everyone's going to continually build more, do more as they continue to grow and grow and grow. This is that person who is in charge of that, or who's in charge of rebuilding because a dragon landed on the castle walls and tore down part of it. So this person's now the head of leading all of that. Next up is Master of Relations. In my eyes, this is your ambassador. This is who is always traveling and establishing those relations. In an ideal world or worlds, there's probably an agreement of some sense of like diplomatic immunity or protection due to fear of retaliation or war, and this person is probably seen as always being given good treatment by whatever visitor. Just this is kind of the person whose butt you want to kiss to establish those good relationships with opulent and connected kingdoms. Last and possibly least, depending on where your interests in world building are, is the Master of Commerce, which if the Master of Coin deals internally, Master of Commerce looks at the outward. It looks at what's coming in and what's being sent out. So a lot of it is really pretty straightforward. The Masters of Leadership as a general concept is one that is still very new to me, so I'm mostly putting the tools in everyone else's belt as I continue to work through and build my own world and worlds on top of it. But what I want to make available to you guys is the ability to create easier. There's a lot of tools, a lot of advice, a lot of things I've seen, practical exercises that I just want to talk on and give my own feedback on and my own thoughts on and expound on further, because should whoever see this be struggling with the same thing, I want them to have the opportunity to really be better tomorrow. Not be hung up on and worried at, because, you know, I've had players who have pretty much outright called me a bad DM because I didn't have an answer for them right then and there. And if I can remove that pitfall, obviously bad or toxic players are gonna exist in their own right. However, if I can minimize the anxieties that a DM may have about not having certain things prepped by making it easier to prep those things, I would like to do that. And with that, I think I've covered everything roundabout that I'd like to discuss in this video. I know this is the first video, obviously, so I expect it to probably, hopefully, not be my best. With that, I encourage any level of feedback, anything really. But I just want to say I hope you all can create a little better. I hope we all can all create what we love and create from what we love. With that, I'll encourage you all to have a happy day and do good out there and create fun and interesting worlds. Until next we meet.